over to you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me. Mark Parrish, I'm the Managing Director of Cortexa. We're an e-learning business based in Northamptonshire. We've recently moved into a new business centre in the old Timpson's building in Kettering, although we haven't seen it for quite some time because we dispersed from our offices on March 23rd and we haven't been back since. So we're waiting out to see what happens over the next few weeks as to whether we'll take up our new COVID-proof office in Kettering. I've entitled my phrase with a tip of the hat to a famous beer brand that we're training those parts that other training systems fail to reach. We've been in the e-learning business for a number of years, and my background, I came into e-learning from the building materials supply chain. I spent a number of years as HR director for the BSS group, which is now part of Travis Perkins. And one of the challenges that I faced over the years was getting skills and particularly product knowledge into people in multiple locations around the country. So BSS, when I was there, had about 150 branches, and those branches were from the north of Scotland down to Dublin to Kent, and trying to train people over those locations was the biggest challenge. So I set up Cortexa in 2001. And we've established a sort of place in the middle of that supply chain. So we work extensively with people, the building materials providers, everybody from brick companies through to window manufacturers, tiles, electricals, plumbing, heating, you name it. We work with them and pass their develop and pass their training material through our supply chain. I'll show you a little bit more about one of our platforms later on. As I say, we're based in Kettering. We are an e-learning business. We do both content and platforms. So we were able to provide an end-to-end solution for our customers. LMS is a sort of historical base where we're learning management systems, but increasingly we're now starting to talk about learning experience platforms and leveraging the knowledge that exists within organizations. And that social learning element is becoming a much more tangible part of how we deliver online learning. And as a business, we see our role as helping people to chart their route through the difficult fields that are is online learning and skills development within their organizations. So we tend to develop long-term relationships with our customers. We have a couple of customers that we've worked with for 16, 17 years. Others have joined us this year. So we have quite a wide range there. Okay, so that in a nutshell is us. So what I'm going to talk about today, I think most people that I speak to these have some experience of e-learning. And what I want to talk about are the challenges of dealing with not the obvious people in the organization that you have to upskill, train, and ensure that they comply with safety and regulatory frameworks. In an e-learning environment, office-based staff tend to gravitate towards e-learning, and sales, management, all tend to sit quite comfortably with e-learning. The people that we've always struggled to engage, and we've worked hard to overcome those struggles, are people who work in the warehouse environment, in the builders merchants, the drivers, all of those practical, the yard staff, the trade counter staff, the people who are working in the open, in the warehouse scenario. So the challenges that we have with those people is, first of all, getting them to log in, getting them in front of a screen or getting them onto a mobile device so they can actually engage with the learning management system. The second one is, once we've got them to log in, is getting them to concentrate. So it's one thing to get past that first username and password, but to get them to concentrate for more than a couple of minutes when they're in pretty hectic environments is a challenge in its own right. The third challenge is then getting them to complete pieces. So whether they are assessments or training pieces or compliance items, getting them to complete is the third challenge. And the final challenge is, once they've done their first piece, is getting them to come back. A lot of programs that we run on behalf of our customers are recurring programs. So they expire after 12 months, after 24 months, typically things like fire safety, manual handling, GDPR, anti-money laundering, all those sorts of programs where they have to be done for compliance reasons on a annual or biannual basis. So getting people to come back is the fourth challenge. So we'll have a look at how we've dealt with some of those, and then we'll see those in practice towards the end of the presentation. Before we go into those sort of challenges in a bit more detail, we have to sort of found what we do on strong principles. Honey and Mumford, very famous model for learning styles. People broadly, activist, pragmatist, reflector, theorist. If we take each of those in turns, activists are learners who very much prefer doing and experiencing things, trying things, pushing until it breaks. The famous activist never opens instructions when they buy new products. Go straight into the build, straight into the use of the product, and if it doesn't work, then I'll look at the instructions. Reflectors, those people who sit quietly and think about what they're being told or what the world's telling them, gives them a chance to observe and reflect. Theorists wanting to understand underlying reasons and structures and hypotheses. And pragmatists, those people like to have a go, like to take things apart, see how they work, build them back up again. And these difficult guys and people to reach, because they're not all male, broadly sit up in this area here. They're activist pragmatists. So, and we have to be very cognizant of that when we're putting learning objects together. So if we then look at this continuum and then overlay on that learning objects. So here we've got typical learning objects that we might use in an e-learning environment. The blue being learning objects or learning activities, the yellow being assessments where we're testing whether people understand and where they're most effective in those learning areas. So there isn't a single tool or a single approach that addresses all of those learning styles. At the center, the classic assessment, multiple choice, those sorts of things, tends to be fairly, as long as you use a wide range of questioning styles, tends to be effective across all learning styles. But if we come out into our reflector areas, they're quite best in their learning if they're looking at examples of success, or they're comparing case studies and they're classifying elements. Our theorists are looking to formalize things and put them into structure. Our pragmatists like to look at exercises based around case studies or problem solving. And going back to what I was saying a moment ago about our difficult audience, is the people up here. So what we need to do to engage these very busy people who've got very short windows of attention is to use some approaches which are going to engage with them. So problem-orientated tasks, single-user games or multi-user games. If you've got a big budget, multi-user games are great, but it's difficult to justify sort of tens and hundreds of thousands of pounds to develop custom games for learning. I know some organisations have done it, but I haven't come across very many. In terms of how we go about teaching, giving them problems to solve and exercises, those are the sorts of areas where we can, and if we can keep those short, then it's even better. So those are the sorts of things that we're trying to do when we're engaging our challenging individuals, we call them. So first of all, then getting them to log in. Well, the golden rule for any e-learning system, it's got to be easy to access, and in the modern era that means it's got to be online. If you've got an app that goes with the LMS, even better, but as a minimum it needs to be responsive so people can access that content online, both for accessing the learning but also for things like receiving alerts and looking at where they are in terms of the leaderboards and information, that sort of stuff. So making it mobile is absolutely essential. The other things that will encourage people to log in is how the behaviours that you're trying to influence and shape through incentives. So if completing modules, I think Steve mentioned those in the previous presentation. You know, getting people to rewarding people for completing courses and for upskilling and staying upskilled is quite a strong reason for people to log in. One of our customers, which is a major plumbers merchant, had a set of courses, annual compliance courses that had to be completed by everybody in the organisation to qualify for a £250 bonus, which was paid 2 weeks before Christmas. So the number of password resets and questions on our help desk that we got in that last week of November was quite remarkable, should we say, as people are trying to make sure they get their bonus for the Christmas spending period. And also consequences. You know, yes, there need to be incentives and positive things, but consequences not doing things. So we have workflows that sit within our learning management systems, which will give fair warning to individuals if their qualifications are about to expire. But then the consequences being that there's an escalation, so reports start getting generated of non-compliers and those sorts of things, so that people are aware that if they don't requalify on a particular course, then their boss will find out, and there will be follow up on that. Next is getting them to concentrate and concentrating and completing, and that's really all about getting stuff which is short, fun, and even better if it can be competitive as well. Then those three elements will enable to enhance that engagement level. So we would typically put training pieces in that are 5 minutes long at the most. So that's sort of 3 or 4 minutes of learning and about a minute's worth of assessment, what typically known as the learning bite. If it could be fun, great. Sometimes some of the topics we deal with are quite difficult to make fun, but at least the process can be engaging. In terms of the competition side, that primarily is things around badges, leaderboards, so they can compare what their score's like against other people. And seeing those is quite a good way to incentivize people to concentrate and get good scores. Getting them to complete, it's about things like gamification. This is a screen grab from a site we're going to have a look at in a moment. Badges are a good way to get people sort of engaged with a system. So badges for completing courses, for replying to forum posts, for engaging with social content. So lots of activities can be hooked into badges, and people can become qualified and get their recognition for being participating. And the reward side, I mentioned it a moment ago, linking skills acquisition and compliance into incentives can be done, and that's a strong driver as well. Last but not least is getting them to come back. The repetition and rework of content and additional skill stuff is really important of any online learning system. So the first would be things like having a good solid reminder system that sends out alerts, so that when in advance of an expiry, the learner is told that they've got X weeks or X days to complete the training, to come back and redo, notifying of updates or changes to regulations, or a new version of a course that they need to do to fulfill their role. So all of those can be sent out via the alert systems. In terms of content, keep it fresh. If every time somebody goes back into a program or into a site, it looks the same and there's nothing new there, it becomes more and more difficult to get people to return and to come back. Incentives and consequences, you sort of start to see the recurring themes here. So those are some tips and hints. Probably easier to see what that looks like in practice. So I'm going to take the the unforgivable sin of doing a live demo on an incentive. So we'll start with this a learning management system. So this program, can I just check everybody can see the browser? We'll just get a yes from somebody.
Yeah, it's on there, Mike. You might want to make it full screen just to make it a little bit bigger.
Okay, let's go. There we go. That better?
Yeah, great.
Okay, so this site is what we call a multi-tenant site. The Builders Merchants Federation look after virtually all the builders merchants in the UK. They have 450 merchant members, of which we deal with about 25% of them, and largely the bigger ones. So they have a core site, which is Builders Merchants Federation, BMF branded, but then their larger members also have own brand versions of this site. So the BMF are curating the content and the courses, and then the members are able to access this site at different levels depending on their size and their requirements. And users will log in with an individual username and profile, and immediately they're served up a site which can get them into their learning and their compliance material. So you can see here that we've got Derek Sykes who's logged in. The last course to the access was an LGV driver assessment. We'll have a look at that in a moment. But there are other courses that he's engaged with down here on the left-hand side, and there are quick links around here. What I will do, just before I go into the courses itself, let me just I just want to toggle into a different site. So this is an identical site with, let me just log in. If I log in as on here. So this is exactly the same framework. So let me just go to 2 and 1. Sorry, I told you this. It was a, let me just go back to the, I've logged in with the wrong username, so let me just, so Mansfield Building Supplies would access exactly the same site with the same feature set, but they have their own branding and their own wallpaper. So here we go. BMF Campus is a core site, and then the satellite site can be own branded. So depending on where the customers come into that, they get a different experience. So let's go back to Derek and his experience. So he has his own. Get rid of these. So he has his own learning plans. So he has a personal development learning plan, which he can go into and add courses to. So he's already got a few courses lined up here for his personal development plan and various other things. In terms of the so I'm logged in. Oh. So I've named the cardinal sort of logging myself out. So here's Derek. So the driver assessment I was talking about is a series of little mini modules. Each of them take about 5 minutes. So with this particular program, we're aiming to target drivers in their downtime on mobiles. So they'd go in doing things like a hazard perception test. And this would basically give them a series of 15 questions that they go through, identify the potential developing hazard in this image. We obviously got some pedestrians here about to cross the road. Got that one right. This one always confuses me. I'm not quite sure where the hazard is, so I'm going to guess in this quarter. Got that one wrong. So there is a sort of a gamified piece here where they're trying to get as many correct answers as they can. So I'm going to just jump out of that. So close that tab. So it's just communicating back. So these are the sorts of modules that we get that will give them that sort of quick hit of training. And one of the best ways that we've found working with drivers directly is to challenge their knowledge through assessment, and they learn through the assessment side rather than trying to teach them through sort of formal programs. Going back to another approach, what we did is a fairly significant transport training program, which we then amalgamated into a single program for learning managers, and this was for the Selco Builders Merchants Warehouse team. So if I just, so there were 7 modules and a knowledge check that we put together. So each of these mini modules existed on the program in their own right, and then we brought them together into a formal program. And the way we managed to engage people with the things like vehicle pre-use checks is this character here, Ray, is the company's transport manager. And we spent some time with him. It doesn't always show, but we coached him in how to present video. So we did little things like short introductions to the program, and then he appears throughout giving advice on how on various things and keeping things short. So here we've got a 90-second video on engine and tire checks. So Ray's so as a tutor or as a subject matter expert for the business, he had a lot of credibility because he was very visible around the business doing audits and those sorts of things as well. So other items that come in, things around working with cranes. They had some really serious accidents in the industry with cranes when they were first introduced, but the training of those is a really important element as well. So getting content which is relevant to the business and chimes with them on their daily work is really sort of an important part of that whole process as well. So I think I'm happy to jump back into either of those if there are any questions specifically about that content. But I'm going to sort of wrap up there. That's my 20 minutes, so it gives us a chance to ask some questions if there are any questions to be had on the chat. But back to you, Richard.
Thanks very much, Mark. It's always a bold decision when you do the live demo, but I think it adds a lot more to it when you can actually see the videos and see under the hood.
Indeed, yeah.
But, we have got some questions just before that. What's your view on maybe apps versus normal websites for these things? If it's hard to reach people in drivers, is there a preference for designing an app over a website?
What we tend to do is use a complementary app rather than a standalone piece. I think the power of apps is great, but there is sort of there's also an element of command and control within LMS and compliance. So I think if you have a core learning management system where people can establish their foundations of learning and then the app complements that, I think that's probably the best balance. So you can deliver training, you can deliver alerts and reminders via the app, but it sort of dovetails in to the LMS. That would be my general view on that. So.
Thanks. And then John Henderson asks, how do you make the content engaging and less of a tick box exercise? Do you build feedback into the exercises and the training from people to get their ideas on how they found it?
We do, yeah. The feedback element is really important. So we do a combination of quick, short question feedbacks at the end of each module, but then we have a program follow-up, normally 2 weeks after, to check on retention and more considered views. When you're running online programs, when you get to the end, you've completed the assessment. People are generally wanting to leave, so trying to get considered views from them in that immediate sort of post-assessment or post-e-learning period isn't great. So we get much better quality responses downstream. They're a bit harder to get, but once you do get them, they're a bit more, they're better quality.
Thank you. This is another anonymous one. There are multiple requests for better soft or human skills like critical thinking to complement automation. big data, etc., in supply chain. How does e-learning tackle these learn by doing requirements to optimize the supply chain?
Wow, unpick that. So
I think maybe the first part there around the better human skills, critical thinking. I know that's something that covers a lot of roles. Is e-learning
yes,
complementary to learning critical thinking?
I think it can be. We're doing a piece of work with the Institute of Leadership and Management at the moment, and they've got some quite broad distance learning materials which are quite challenging to convert into online. One of the difficulties of online is that people, I always talk about taking the pace out of the day when people hit the screen and want to learn, because we all lead very busy lives and our use of the internet tends to be quite frantic. One of the jobs of the learning management system and the learning designer is to slow the learner down so they can reflect and can learn, particularly when you get more sophisticated topics, you know, when you're getting into the management development zones and the, you know, and action-centered learning. Yes, I think there are some techniques you can use to hit those topics in a different way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And a question from one of our students, Aparna. She talks about how e-learning courses are really used for self-study, where academic institutions, schools, universities are still using books, e-books. Do you have any sort of thoughts on where that's going? Are books, e-books going to be deprioritized in study? Do you think it's going to become more e-learning is going to be the standard way that people learn from now on?
I think yes. I think certainly we're finding that we're plugging in more podcasts and webinars into online learning and less. So whilst 5 years ago we'd have been putting in PDF resources for people to go away and read, what now people are demanding and we're getting more traction with are little mini podcasts or structured webinars that support. And when we do live events on within programs, the recordings get quite a lot of traffic as well. So that follow up. I think yes, there is space for reading. We always sort of hook into other websites and other resources, but you know, it tends to be more video engagement, podcast, that sort of stuff.
Thank you. Question from Abby and Bola. Is there an integration between the solutions that you develop and a company's overall objectives and strategy, operational and financial? I guess it's how much of what you build gets dictated by what the company wants to do versus maybe bringing your own ideas into it.
Yeah, the bridge there tends to be the performance review and the performance management stuff. So there'll be modules that fit within the learning management system, which would do cascade company goals, for example. So if there is a genuine margin improvement goal for the whole business, then those goals can be cascaded across the whole organization. People can then set goals within the learning management system, and that feeds into learning plans and L&D.
Great. Thanks very much, Mark. Tony, was there anything you wanted to follow up on that?
Yeah, again, really not questions for Mark, but obviously listening to the presentation and that, I think they've obviously covered, I think, some of the key areas. You know, we know from feedback that obviously e-learning is becoming more important to people. I think what e-learning does to an extent is I guess, as I say, from my experience, we sort of used to go through the days of training where hustling everybody into a room, you know, hustling 20 people into a room, delivering the same course was always viewed as the right thing to do. And it's almost like a sheep dip exercise. But people learn in different ways and they learn at different paces and everything else. So I think e-learning does offer that opportunity to have that approach. But but it's a really interesting subject, because how far can you go with sort of soft skills? How far can you go with leadership training and what have you? You know, and we've been doing quite a lot of work with military through our Forces Logistics Initiative, but clearly an awful lot of the training that's done through the military it's there, it's experience, it's, you know, and I know it's a very different type of training, don't get me wrong, but But I just think it's just great to have that in the mix. But I think the whole online learning experience.
Yeah, I'd agree. It has to be part of an overall proposition.
Talking about drivers, we get lots of transport businesses are involved with the forum, and they often face the challenge of training drivers, keeping CPC training up to date and on all those other good things that are expected of people to do. It was just really interesting to hear that. And also, I guess, in the context of, so I guess not just really in Mark's area, but talking about the whole digital world that we live in, is taking that back a step further and considering how is that ever now picked up in education. So before our young people ever actually get into the workplace, how can that, particularly if kids are staying on at school longer, how can that be built into a curriculum, and how can that be developed further? And I think that's a massive question, and we don't have time to deal with that. But I think the whole digital world now that we are living in, it's a really interesting place to be. So,
yeah, definitely. I think that's the idea of sessions like this is to show people how technology is being used in different sectors, so people can come to it from other areas and then just get ideas what they can take back to their own sectors, whether that's academia or esports, gaming, gamification. Mark talked about their gaming coming into e-learning. I think there's lots of crossovers of this technology where it can get used elsewhere.
Thanks, Mark.
I think that's it. Thanks very much to all the presenters. Really appreciate your time coming on this morning, and for the attendees, some great questions. Tony, hopefully from the logistics forum point of view, it was useful to join digital and yourselves together today. Hopefully in the future some sort of collaboration or ideas could come from that.
It'd be interesting to see how, I guess, once we get Christmas out of the way, whether we're all still in one piece after that, but really interesting. So thanks to everybody.
Yeah, great. And then if you just want to keep an eye on Digital Northampton on our website, digitalnorthampton.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, we'll post all our events on there. So they're all free. So please do spread the word. Thanks again, everybody.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.